It happened in an instant. A loud scream. A massive explosion. Shards of something flew everywhere around Silica. She spun around and took off like a shot. Her eyes fixed on her next target. Her health was already super low, but she didn't even notice. All she could think about was taking down that enemy. Just as she was making a crazy dash towards the bad guys, who were swinging a huge club at her, something amazing happened. A bright white light flashed across the scene, striking the two drunk apes from behind. It was like something out of a superhero movie. The apes' bodies split in half, and then they just exploded into tiny pieces. Silica stopped dead in her tracks, totally shocked. Then she saw him, the lone guy standing behind where the apes used to be. He was the one who had saved her with that incredible white light. Silica's eyes widened as she stared at him in awe. Who was this mysterious hero? This guy was intense. His black hair and coat made him almost invisible in the shadows. He wasn't super tall, but he seemed to radiate a powerful energy that made you want to back away slowly. And that's exactly what Silica did. She stumbled backward, her heart racing with fear. But when their eyes met, something unexpected happened. His gaze was kind and deep, like staring up at a starry night sky. He carefully put away his sword, the metal sliding into its holder with a soft shing sound. Then he opened his mouth to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sorry I couldn't save your friend," he said, his words trembling slightly. That's when Silica felt her last bit of strength fade away, leaving her feeling weak and vulnerable. Tears poured out of Silica's eyes like a never-ending flood. Her dagger slipped from her hand, and landed with a loud clatter on the ground. But she didn't even notice. All she cared about was the beautiful blue feather lying still and unmoving before her. Silica dropped to her knees, her heart aching. The anger that had been burning inside her started to fade away, replaced by a deep sadness that filled her chest. She felt lost and sorrowful, and all she could think about was the delicate feather that now seemed so still and lifeless. Silica burst into tears, and they streamed down her face like a never-ending river. What was happening didn't make sense. Familiar AI wasn't supposed to be programmed to attack monsters on its own. But Pina had just thrown herself in front of a powerful blow, proving that their bond was real. Silica's hands were shaking as she clutched the ground, her voice cracking with sobs. "Please, Pina, don't leave me alone," she begged. But there was only silence. The pale blue feather lay still and unresponsive. The swordsman in black spoke up again, his voice filled with regret. "I'm sorry," he said, his words a sad echo in the air. Silica fought back tears, shaking her head wildly. "No, it's my fault," she whispered between sobs. "I was so stupid." She took a deep breath and managed to say, "Thanks for saving me." The man who had rescued her walked up slowly and knelt down beside her. He spoke in a gentle voice. "Hey, about that feather. Does it have a special name?" Silica's eyes widened in surprise. What did the feather have to do with anything? She rubbed away her tears, and stared at the pale blue feather again, thinking hard. As she looked at it, she realized something weird. Why was only one feather left behind? It didn't make sense. Silica's curiosity took over, and she forgot about her tears for a moment. She looked up at the man, waiting for him to explain what he meant. Imagine you're playing a super realistic video game like SAO. When something dies, whether it's a monster or another player, it vanishes into thin air. Everything disappears, their equipment, their items, everything. Silica's hand was shaking as she reached out and gently tapped the feather with her finger, kind of like clicking a mouse on a computer. Suddenly a see-through window popped up in front of her. It showed the weight and name of the item, Pina's heart. Silica was about to burst into tears again, when a man jumped into the conversation. Wait, he said quickly. "Wait, don't give up hope," he said. "If her special item is still with us, we might be able to bring her back." Silica's eyes widened in surprise. She stared up at him, her mouth hanging open. "What are you talking about?" she asked. He leaned in and whispered. "It's a secret that not many people know, but I heard that on the 47th floor, there's a special place called the Hill of Memories. It's an outdoor dungeon, located at the south end. It's not easy to find something with a nice name like that," he said, but then he dropped a bombshell. "There's a special flower that grows on top of the hill." Silica's eyes widened as he started to explain its powers. "It's supposed to bring back loved ones who..." But before he could finish, Silica let out a loud shriek. "Really?" she exclaimed, jumping up from her seat. Just moments before she had been feeling sad and hopeless. But now a spark of hope was lit in her heart again. As she said the 47th floor, her shoulders drooped. That was way too high up, 12 floors above what she felt safe with. She looked down at the ground feeling defeated. But then the man spoke up, rubbing his head thoughtfully. "You know, I could go get it for you. If you're willing to pay for my trip and a little extra," he said. "The thing is, I've heard that special flower only blooms when the beast tamer, who lost her partner, goes there in person." Silica's face lit up with a smile, surprised by the man's kind offer. "No, it's okay," she said. "I'm so glad I got the scoop. If I keep working hard and leveling up, I just know I'll make it someday." But then I heard some tough news. "It's not as simple as you think. Someone warned me. When your familiar dies, you only have 3 days to bring it back to life. After that, its name changes from heart to memento. And that's it." Silica burst out in shock. "No way. That can't be true." She was really worried, and it's no wonder why. She was currently at level 44. And the thought of losing her familiar was terrifying. Imagine playing your favorite role-playing game RPG. Usually the game is designed so that each level, or floor, matches up with a certain player level. But in this crazy game, SAO, things are different. If you die, it's super serious. There are permanent consequences, so players want to be way stronger than the floor they're on, like at least 10 levels ahead. That means if someone is heading to the 47th floor, they should be at least level 55. Anything less would be pretty risky. Silica was stuck. She knew it was almost impossible to level up more than 10 times in just 3 days. And if she wanted to make it to the hill with the special flower, she'd be lucky to get 2 levels done. Silica had been on adventures for a whole year, and had worked really hard to get where she was. But now she felt like giving up. She slumped to the ground, feeling super disappointed in herself. Once again. As she gently picked up Pina's feather, she held it close to her heart with both hands. She felt sad and frustrated with herself, and tears started falling again. Just then, she heard the man getting up from somewhere above her. She wanted to thank him one more time before he left, but she just couldn't find the strength to speak. Suddenly, a sparkly computer screen appeared in front of her. It was a trade menu. As she glanced up, she saw him fiddling with the same window again. Suddenly, weird items started popping up on the trading list, things like silver thread armor and ebon dagger. She had no idea what any of it meant. She began to say, but the man interrupted her in a pretty rude way. "This gear will give you a major power-up," he said. "It's like getting 5 or 6 levels all at once." "Hey, if I come with you, we might just make it," he said with a grin. Silica's jaw dropped. She just stood there staring at him in shock. She had no idea what he was thinking. As she focused on him, a green cursor popped up next to his face, but all it showed was a simple health bar. It didn't say his name or level, which was pretty typical for this crazy game. And the weirdest part, Silica couldn't even guess how old he was. He looked super cool in his sleek black outfit, but what really caught your attention was how chill he seemed. You'd think he was way older than he actually was. But then you saw his eyes peeking out from under his messy bangs, and they looked kinda innocent. His face was also pretty rounded like a kid's. Silica got up the nerve to ask him, "Hey, why are you doing all this for me?" She was still being super cautious though. Something about the whole situation made her feel uneasy. Silica had dealt with some pretty weird guys in the game of Aincrad. Some older men had even hit on her. And one had asked her to marry him. For a 13-year-old like Silica, this was super creepy. She wasn't used to getting attention from guys, not even from boys in her class at school. To stay safe, Silica learned to steer clear of male players who seemed shady or wanted something in return. She knew that if a deal sounded too good to be true, it probably was. Meanwhile, a guy was trying to figure something out. He scratched his head, thinking really hard. He opened his mouth to say something, but then changed his mind and stayed quiet. He looked away, then mumbled, "This isn't a superhero story, so if you promise not to laugh, I'll tell you what's going on." She promised she wouldn't laugh. But when he said, "You look like my little sister," she just couldn't help it. Silica burst out laughing and tried to cover her mouth, but giggles kept slipping out. The guy looked hurt and slumped his shoulders. "You said you wouldn't laugh," he complained, looking pretty miserable. That just made Silica laugh even harder. Maybe this guy wasn't so bad after all. As she tried to calm down her giggles, Silica thought, why not trust him? What's the worst that could happen? She was ready to take a chance, because she had nothing left to lose. Her friend Pina needed help, and this might be the only way to save her. Silica nodded slightly, and said thanks for helping me out. You've already saved my life once, and now you're doing it again. Silica gazed out the window, then started typing away on her computer. She was making a trade with someone, and she put all of her valuable items into the deal. But when she saw what the other person was offering, her eyes widened in shock. There were over 10 amazing pieces of equipment on their side. Super rare stuff you couldn't find anywhere else. This isn't even close to being fair, Silica said, feeling a bit worried. I mean, my items are nowhere near worth all of that. But the other person just shrugged it off. Don't worry about the money, they said with a grin. I don't need it. He looked at the stuff in front of him, and said, this is all leftover stuff.
I guess it's kind of why I'm here anyway.
He sounded pretty mysterious, then he hit the OK button, but he didn't take the gold.
Thanks, this is just too much, he said. My name is Silica, by the way.
Silica was waiting for him to be shocked and say something like, you're that Silica. But instead he just looked at her like she was a normal person. It seemed like he had no idea who she was. At first she felt a pang of disappointment, but then she remembered that being too full of herself had gotten her into trouble in the first place. She took a deep breath and moved on. A guy with a friendly smile nodded at her and held out his hand. I'm Kirito, he said. Looks like we're going to be working together for a bit. She shook his hand and they sealed their temporary partnership. Kirito pulled out a crumpled map from his pouch and studied it. He figured out which way the exit was and started walking. Follow me, he seemed to say without actually saying a word. The map showed the winding paths of the Forest of Wandering, and Kirito looked like he knew where he was going. She fell into step behind him, ready to see where their adventure would take them. Silica followed closely behind, gently holding Pina's feather to her lips. She made a silent promise. Don't worry, Pina. I'll get you back, I promise. As she walked, the scenery changed. They entered the main city on the 35th floor, which was totally different from what she expected. It looked like a cute farm town, complete with white houses and red roofs. The town wasn't huge, but it was buzzing with people. Lots of mid-level players were hanging out here, making it a really lively place. Silica's actual hometown was Freven, way down on the 8th floor. She loved it there and it always felt like home. Imagine having a dream home in a fantastic place, but not being able to afford it. That's what was happening with Silica. She couldn't buy a house in this cool town, so staying in an inn room wasn't much different from any other floor. One thing that did stand out though was the food. The inn owners, who were like characters in a game, served some tasty dishes. Silica especially loved the cheesecake made by one of the cooks. After spending 2 weeks in town, Silica was finally ready for her next adventure. Exploring the Forest of Wandering, she walked with Kirito down the main street to the teleport square, taking in all the sights and sounds around her. Everything seemed new and exciting. Suddenly familiar faces started shouting out to Silica. News had spread like wildfire that she was a free agent again, and now everyone wanted her on their team. Thanks for thinking of me, but Silica tried to let them down easy, then sneaked a peek at Kirito standing next to her. I'm going to join forces with him for a bit, she said with a smile. The crowd grumbled and complained, giving Kirito the side eye. They just didn't get it. Silica had seen him in action, and she knew he was awesome. But to everyone else he looked like a total newbie. He didn't have any fancy gear or cool armor, just a worn-out leather jacket over his shirt. He seemed really quiet and laid back too. Definitely not what you'd expect from a strong player. The crowd wasn't convinced, and they shot Silica suspicious glances, wondering why she'd chosen to team up with this mysterious guy. Kirito walked in, a single sword strapped to his back, no shield in sight. Suddenly a tall guy with a huge sword stepped up to him. This guy had been trying to win Silica's heart for ages, and he didn't like Kirito butting in. Hey, you're new around here, the guy said, looking down his nose at Kirito. I don't appreciate you cutting in front of us. We've been waiting for a long time. Kirito shifted uncomfortably and scratched his head. Sometimes things just don't go as planned, I guess. He didn't seem to want to start a fight. Silica turned to the tall guy, looking a bit disappointed that Kirito wasn't standing up for himself. Actually, I asked him to join me, she said. Silica bowed one last time, then grabbed Kirito's coat sleeve and took off quickly. The guys she was leaving behind waved goodbye, saying they'd send her more messages soon. Silica hurried across the teleport square and down the main street, which led north. As soon as the crowd of players disappeared from view, she let out a sigh of relief and looked up at Kirito. "I'm really sorry about all that," she said. Kirito just smiled and said, "No big deal." He seemed totally okay with what had just happened. "Wow, Miss Silica, you're really popular," I said. She smiled and replied, "Just call me Silica, and it's not like I'm actually well liked. They just want me to be their team mascot, so they look cooler." She looked down, her voice shaking. I got caught up in all the attention, and made some bad choices. Next thing I knew, I was all alone in the forest, and that's when everything fell apart. Silica's eyes started to well up with tears again, as she thought about her friend Pina. But then Kirito spoke up, his voice calm and soothing. "It's gonna be okay," he said, trying to comfort her. "Don't worry, we'll get Pina back," he said with a reassuring smile. Silica's tears started to dry as she looked up at him. For some reason she felt like everything was going to be okay. As they walked, a big 2-story building appeared on their right. It was called the Weather Vane, and it was Silica's favorite inn. She had stayed there before, and it was way bigger than the other buildings around it. Silica's eyes widened as she realized she'd made a mistake. "Hey Kirito, I'm so sorry, but where do you actually live?" she asked. Kirito thought for a moment before answering. "I've got a place on the 50th floor, but it's a bit of a trek to get there. I'll just crash here tonight instead." Silica beamed with excitement. "Yes, and the best part is, they have amazing cheesecake here." She grabbed Kirito's arm and started pulling him into the inn, but just as they were about to go inside, a group of people came out of the item shop next door. There were 4 or 5 of them, and they looked like they meant business. The big day had finally arrived. The party Silica had been planning for 2 whole weeks. As the group walked towards the square, the guys in front didn't notice a thing. But then disaster struck. The woman at the back of the group turned around, and Silica's eyes met hers in a split second. It was like time froze. And who was this woman? None other than her arch-nemesis, the spearwoman she had clashed with in the Forest of Wandering. That fight had ended badly, causing Silica to leave the party. Now here they were, face to face again. Silica tried to sneak into the inn without being noticed. She hid her face and hoped no one would see her, but it didn't work. "Hey, is that Silica?" someone asked. She had to stop and turn around. "Hi again," she said quietly. A woman with super curly red hair named Rosalia looked at her with a mean grin. "Wow, you actually made it out of the forest. What luck," Rosalia said, laughing in a way that wasn't very nice. Then she added, "But don't think you can just come crawling back to us now. We already decided who gets what," Silica said. But the woman didn't back off. "I told you, I don't want anything." Silica tried to brush her off, saying, "Excuse me, I'm busy." She wanted to end the conversation fast. But the woman just wouldn't quit. Then she noticed something was missing from Silica's shoulder. A sneaky grin spread across her face. "Hey, where's your little lizard?" she asked, sounding pretty happy that it was gone. Silica's eyes narrowed, and she bit her lip. Rosalia's eyes sparkled, with a hint of mischief. She knew the rules: a familiar couldn't be stored away like a regular item or hidden somewhere else. So, if Silica's friend was nowhere to be found, there was only one possible reason. Rosalia pretended not to know this, a sly grin spreading across her face. "Oh no. Does this mean what I think it means?" she asked, trying to sound clueless, but before she could finish, Silica blurted out the bad news. "She died." Silica shot Rosalia an angry glance, as if warning her not to say another word. Rosalia's eyes grew wide with surprise. "You think you can bring Pina back to life?" she said, a sly grin spreading across her face. She let out a low whistle. "That means you're planning to visit the Hill of Memories. But are you sure you're ready for that?" Just then Kirito jumped into the conversation. He strode forward, his coat swinging in front of Silica. "Don't worry, she can handle it," he said confidently. "The Hill of Memories isn't that tough." Rosalia raised an eyebrow at Kirito, her red lips curling up into a sneer. "Oh, so she's got you under her spell too, huh?" she teased. Silica's eyes blazed with anger, but her voice trembled. "You think I'm not tough," she muttered, trying to hold back tears. Kirito stepped in, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Hey, let's get out of here," he said softly. He led her into the cozy Weathervane Inn, leaving Rosalia's mocking laugh behind. As they entered, the delicious smells of food filled their noses. The first floor was a big restaurant, buzzing with chatter and clinking dishes. Kirito guided Silica to a quiet table in the back, where she could calm down. Then, he walked over to the front desk, where a friendly NPC, a non-player character, like a computer-controlled helper, waited to assist them. Kirito checked them in and then sat back down with Silica. She was about to say sorry for what had just happened, but Kirito stopped her with a smile. "Hey, let's get some food first," he said. Just then, the waiter showed up with 2 steaming hot mugs. They were filled with a weird-looking red drink that smelled really interesting. Kirito raised his mug and said, "To our new team." Silica took a sip of the hot drink and her eyes lit up. This is tasty." The spicy smell and sweet and sour taste reminded her of a special wine her dad had let her try when she was little. Silica had been at this place for 2 weeks and had tried every single drink on the menu. But when she took a sip of this new drink, she was stumped. "What is this?" she asked Kirito, who just gave her a sneaky grin. "You can bring your own drinks to places like this," he explained. "This one's special, it's called Ruby Ichor. If you drink a cup, it'll actually make you more agile." Silica's eyes widened in surprise. "But that must be super valuable," she exclaimed. Kirito just chuckled. "Let's be real, storing a fancy drink in my inventory doesn't make it taste any better over time." Silica's friend shrugged in a super dramatic way. "I don't know many people, so I never get to break it out." He made Silica giggle. She took another sip of the drink and smiled. The taste was weirdly familiar, like something she used to love. It made her feel a little better after a really tough day. Even when the cup was empty, Silica held on to it tight, feeling the warmth spread through her chest. It was like a big hug in a mug. She stared at the table, shaking her head. Why would someone say such mean things? She wondered out loud. Kirito's face suddenly turned serious. He set his cup down and looked at her. "Have you played any other online games like this before, Sasso?" he asked. She replied, "No, it's my first one." Kirito nodded. "That makes sense. You see, when people create a character in an online game, they often become someone different. It's like they're playing a role. Imagine you're playing a game where you can be any one hero or a villain. That's what makes role-playing games so cool." But one guy wasn't so sure about this particular game. Sepul. His eyes got serious for a second. "Even though we're stuck in this virtual world," he said, "I know it's impossible for all the players to team up and work together to beat the game. Even in a game, there are people who get a kick out of making others miserable." Kirito said, looking straight at Silica. His eyes blazed with anger, but beneath that Silica saw a deep sadness. "I think the ones who do bad things here are probably troubled in real life too," he said, his voice filled with disgust. Then Kirito saw the worried look on Silica's face and said sorry with a smile. "But I'm not one to talk." He admitted, "I don't go around saving people all the time. In fact, I've even left my friends behind to fend for themselves in tough spots." Silica looked at Kirito in surprise. She could tell that he was hiding some deep pain. "Kirito," she said softly, realizing that there was more to the strong swordsman than met the eye. She wanted to tell Kirito how sorry she was, but she couldn't think of the right words. So she did something that felt more natural. She reached out and grabbed his fist with both of her hands. It was sitting on top of the table, and she held it tightly. "You're an amazing person, Kirito," she said. "You saved my life." Kirito looked surprised, and for a second, he tried to pull his hand away. But then he stopped, and just let her hold it.